Hello, and welcome to the Ringer NBA show. It's Group Chat. Paolo, Uggetti.
What's up?
Justin Verrier.
Hello.
Danny Chau.
Morning.
No tournaments for Danny.
I just heard about this tournament about 2 minutes ago, and I'm kind of out on it.
I'm disturbed that you just learned about the tournament, considering who you sit with in an office all day long.
I thought you would have a take when I brought it up to you already. Well, which I guess you do.
Yeah, guys, welcome to Group Chat. Before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about some things happening on the Ringer this week. We have a lot of incredible stuff, but especially I want you to check out the MJ LeBron package that we have going for all you NBA heads. You may have heard these two young whippersnappers. We're hoping that they can reach their potential someday. No, they're the GOATs. They are Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and we have a series of articles that kind of look at them as mirror images of one another and as comparisons, as LeBron chasing Jordan, what Jordan meant to the culture, what LeBron means to the culture. A lot of different ways of looking at two of the greatest athletes most of us have ever seen. So check those articles out. Also, obviously you can't go wrong with any of the Ringer Podcast Network shows, but I want to recommend Draft Class with Danny Chau, John Sharks, and Kevin O'Connor. Yeah. I can already feel the big boards rising in the distance. It's almost draft time, believe it or not. So to get all the prospect information that you need, tune in to Danny, Kevin, and John every Friday, right? Yep. Okay. Okay, guys, the reason why I'm a little bit muted right now is because we got to talk about this Dallas Mavericks situation. It's obviously the biggest story coming out of the All-Star weekend, and we don't really want to spend a lot of time on it because I think in something like this, the best thing for our listeners to do is simply read the reporting. And John Wertheim and Jessica Luther did an incredible job with this piece in Sports Illustrated, and I highly recommend that everybody just check it out. What it basically details is a culture that permitted a CEO to apparently serially sexually harass other employees, and a beat writer who was arrested for a domestic violence charge and pled guilty but was allowed to continue working for the Mavericks. Like I said, there's not really a lot to add here. There's no connections to be made to the Mavericks as a basketball entity. This is something that Mark Cuban's going to have to handle, and he's apparently doing so by bringing in outside investigations. Yesterday, Dirk Nowitzki talked about how ashamed he was of the team and the franchise that something like this could happen. Rick Carlisle said much the same thing. Do you guys have anything to add? There's not really a lot to add. I think Michael Bauman had a very, very good piece on Cuban and how he sort of positioned himself as a figurehead in the league and what that means to him as he kind of handles this controversy. But do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just say that I think as the reporting has gone on by some outlets since like just the Weinstein investigation, it's just important to I guess realize that this isn't just an entertainment industry issue. It's a workplace issue. Yeah. And it's going to affect all sorts of workplaces. And I think just personally, I think I had wondered when this was going to hit sports, just considering that it is a workplace first and foremost, but also just the kind of Friday locker room nature of it all. And so I do wonder if this is like the first of a few to come. Those type of stories, not to just wildly speculate, but you hear things in sports.
Sure. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how NBA franchise, how NFL and MLB franchises handle these kinds of investigations if they're forced to face them. Okay. Let's get to some other NBA news that's been kind of interesting for us this week. And I think, this is a little bit of like a chicken or the egg thing where, over the last couple of years, we've seen this sort of unprecedented star player movement. You could say it started with LeBron, but I think it's really kicked up over the last few seasons with Durant. And this idea that any given NBA superstar is only really 3 or 4 years, like that only really has 3 or 4 years in any one given city, unless like they're literally playing in a dynasty, and even that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they are going to be moving. I was watching some of the Kobe and Shaq interview from the All-Star weekend, and it was so funny to revisit the breakup of that and how seismic that felt at the time. Yeah. But even that, it was like, I think that there was a calculated, like Shaq is kind of, when it goes bad for Shaq, it's going to go pretty fast, right. And it's time to focus on Kobe. But the big story this week was Kawhi. So yesterday afternoon, Greg Popovich did a media availability. I wouldn't even call it a press conference.
He's just before a team practice.
Yeah, he was like had the whistle around his neck. He was kind of gassed. You could tell, but I don't know. Would he have said he basically came out and said that he would be surprised if Kawhi Leonard played this year. Kawhi's been nursing this right quad injury for a long time. He came back briefly.
9 games.
9 games?
9 games. Yeah. That's all we got of Kawhi this season.
And when was that?
It was earlier. It was
January?
Around December? Yeah, December,
no,
January?
I think it was around January. Like,
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was like he looked pretty good. He looked a little out of shape. He didn't look like, the two-way octopus that could just destroy the world.
But he was also like making brief instances in which you saw that kind of dynamic defensive presence, chase down blocks and like blocking guys from the perimeter. It was still there, but it was just wasn't the same Kawhi that we saw last year, who was like an MVP guy.
And even if you look at I'm going back at the game log, and he played basically from the middle of December to like the start of January, but he never played more than 2 games like straight. You know what I'm saying? Like he had intermittent, like
The Embiid
inactive.
program.
Yeah, exactly. So it was clear that like wasn't fully all there yet.
Yeah. So here's the thing about this Popovich press conference is it was not. Granted, he's never going to be like remaking Terms of Endearment, but I did not find it to be the softest touch.
No.
It was more a matter of we have to get ready to go into the playoffs with the guys that we have, and I got to know what I've got. And in subsequent reports by by Woj among others, there has been this is a real read between the lines story because there is obviously a suggestion that Kawhi has been medically cleared to play. So this is up to Kawhi as far as whether or not he's ready or willing to play. And then that this is all part of I think Woj used the word fraying, a strain on the relationship between the Spurs and Leonard. Mm-hmm. So Justin, much ado about nothing. This is just a guy with an injury who's taking a little while longer to come back than we thought, or does this speak to a larger issue between Kawhi and San Antonio?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the fact that it was up to Kawhi came from the Woj report, which seemed to come from Kawhi's sort of side of things.
And Woj wrote the original, is there something wrong between Kawhi and the Spurs piece a couple months ago, right?
Right, and so it wasn't
around the trade deadline.
Right, and you would expect that to more come from the coach side of thing, that like, listen, this guy can come back whenever he wants, he can, it's really up to him, but it was almost... it seemed like an attempt to say that this is like to empower Kawhi, that everything is up to him. And I think that sort of dynamic is something that we talked about in the past is just so unique for the Spurs. They've never had a guy like this just kick up dust. And I think it just speaks to Kawhi being different for that team and also just like the superstar in today's day and age. Like these issues pop up, even as you mentioned, the Spurs are kind of a model franchise that's doing really well, that has a chance to win a finals, even when they don't have a second or third superstar.
Kawhi is normal. Duncan wasn't. And that's, I think, what we have to kind of understand is that we have this measuring stick that we use when we talk about San Antonio and the selflessness of the players. But we're really talking about 3 or 4 guys. Mm-hmm. We're talking about David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker to some extent. And these guys who have just are Spurs lifers who at some point in their career started coming off the bench or, played through injuries. I mean, by all accounts, Duncan basically was limping through the last 6 years of his career. Yeah. And you've got Kawhi who's like, that's not me. Maybe he's just like, I'm not interested in ripping a quad muscle because I don't think it's right yet. Yeah. And then when I could opt out in 2019, or if I just want to get my $220 million, I don't know. I think that maybe Kawhi is normal, and the other experiences we have with San Antonio are with guys who are uncommonly dedicated to this concept of the franchise.
I kind of found it interesting that he dropped that Jordan commercial where, he was out, playing the whole social media game and kind of changing the persona that he'd had for such a long time while he was injured.
Yes.
Yeah. And what that says about that's kind of where I see the whole, frayed relationship with the Spurs maybe taking hold. Like it kind of signals to that. Obviously, we don't know anything about that actual internally, but it was just a weird shift for a guy who was always just kind of very much in the discussion for MVP, but also on the periphery in terms of a personality.
Yeah, because the Spurs commercials usually are those HEB ones that are just really whimsical and
Kawhi
funny.
Killed that too. It was amazing.
Yes.
He was amazing.
And this is similar in tone, but clearly a little bit on a higher level when Jordan is one of the most recognizable brands in the entire sport.
Right. I think Kevin and Verno talked about this on Tuesday, which is like we expect things to be more low key because it's the Spurs, so we kind of like, oh, like they're gonna figure it out or whatever. But this clearly feels like a break off from that sense on multiple levels. The commercial level, but also just like the whole this is how superstars are nowadays level, and it's clear Kawhi wants to, or at least people around Kawhi wanted him to take that next step to being like a notable superstar, not just on the court but off the court. You know, and I think the thing that I was thinking about is just like with Kawhi, like there is. You said earlier, like he's the guy who we're kind of talking about this week, but I think it kind of started with Anthony Davis too, which some of the comments he had, and being like, you wonder if you're a superstar on that same path. He talked about KG and how he bolted to Boston.
Regretted that he hadn't left earlier. Yeah,
tying those things is kind of interesting to me because it makes me feel like these guys are so aware of how things work nowadays with superstars that they're almost like maybe gonna try to do them earlier than usual because it's gonna be beneficial for them. It's just like there's a lot of different factors that I think.
And on the team side, right?
Yeah.
When you're thinking about, I mean, the Spurs are as creative and as self-sustaining as any team out there in terms of their talent pool, but on the team side, this is the new normal for teams where superstars that you think you essentially have locked up are also at the height of their trade value.
Yes.
And that's the thing with Anthony Davis, right? Is like even if it's nice that Anthony Davis thinks that with Boogie healthy, that the Pelicans were finals contenders. Which is like, I mean, I appreciate his like belief in their program.
Right.
And I don't think that that's true, but I think that they were really scary. But there's like a 50-50, if not worse, chance that Boogie is never going to be the same, you know. And Anthony Davis is also he's an injury-prone guy, and so to have him kind of playing what I guess would be the sort of beginning or mid of his prime right now, in a relatively empty gym, on the outside looking into the playoff race, when he probably could be the thing that brings Boston multiple titles if he were to go there, or if he goes in any number of places, just not Golden State, please. Actually, not Boston either.
Sure.
Stay in New Orleans. This is what we're going to be dealing with because these contracts are they're only paper now.
Right. I think it's an interesting contrast to Kawhi, as Paolo was kind of saying, just because it feels like Kawhi or Kawhi's people are kind of pulling at the strings behind the scenes in order to orchestrate something, or at the very least, get their message across in a very like specific way. We were talking about this just yesterday. I think Anthony Davis was just completely honest in his response just about saying like the comparison to KG, and I think that's almost worst. It's almost like I think about the whole Jacob Reese pounding the rock thing that the Spurs, believe it or not, are the ones that everyone talks about. It's like a quote on their locker room, and just the fact that it's like slowly building over time, that's what I think. If you look at the entire scope of these stories about Anthony Davis, we're getting. It's just slowly but surely he's starting to come around to the thinking. It's like, I'm doing everything I can, but these guys, they can't help me out. And like, oh man, it would have been great with Boogie, but now Boogie's out. Like, what am I going to do? You're leaving me with no option.
Right, and what it took to get Boogie and what it'll take to keep Boogie essentially makes it so that we can't be competitive in a real way unless we really absolutely strike gold on some mid-round draft pick or something like that. Here's the thing about the Spurs. We look at them, they're kind of like the Packers, right? They have their couple superstars that they've built with over the years. They don't get too nutty in free agency other than like LaMarcus was sort of the outlier there. And in a weird way, LaMarcus was almost a precursor for what's happening with Kawhi because LaMarcus too was like, I don't know if this is the right place for me. Right. And Pop and he were singing Kumbaya this in the beginning of the season about how they had fixed their relationship. What do you think without any inside knowledge, do you think that this is something that if you're Kawhi Leonard and Pop's like the train's leaving without you, do you think that we're going to see Kawhi on the bench during the playoffs? Do you think he's going to try and get back there? Was this a motivating tactic? Like, what do you think is going to happen going forward?
I think he'll be on the bench. I think the weird thing for me is I understand all of Davis's comments. For me, the Spurs were right there in the Western Conference Finals last year. If the Kawhi injury didn't happen, if Zaza didn't, wreck his foot or whatever happened, they would have been right there. They had that game. They had game one at least. And I feel like when you have that game and you have that game so handled, they would have won by over 20. I feel like they would have had a chance, and if the Spurs just kind of hold everything together and wait things out, I think they could make the finals again. It's like I don't
even with this team.
Yeah.
And do you think that with the this could be a summer of a lot of turnover for the Spurs. I mean, they have a bunch of guys that, what is it, Green,
Bertans.
Like all their middle guys, essentially.
Yeah, and Kyle Anderson, I think, is an RFA. Like a bunch of guys who were kind of on the could leave. On one hand, that clears a lot of cap space. They could be an attractive destination for some people, although San Antonio is not typically regarded as a destination. On the other hand, they kind of have LaMarcus Aldridge, Kawhi Leonard, and the coach of the Olympic team. So, and probably the most respected coach in the NBA, pound for pound.
Yeah, it almost speaks to just like the shortened lifespan of just like guys going to certain teams that I think you can trace back to LeBron. The fact that with the Heat and now the Cavs, it's almost like 4 years and out. I think it might just accelerate when guys want to go other places, when guys get frustrated with their current situations. And when we talk about a lot with LeBron, it's just about player agency and just like controlling your own destiny. And it just feels like guys are just looking at their situations. They want to win immediately. They see that their careers are like, 12 years tops if you're a superstar.
And 2 or 3 of them in the beginning are getting used to the league, and 3 or 4 of them at the end are kind of trying to stay useful. So you basically have like this 8-year, unless you're LeBron, this 8-year sort of significant window to win titles.
And if you're Kawhi and you say, wow, we don't have superstars on this team, like I don't think we could actually win a title, I could see why he is frustrated and potentially would want to go elsewhere. Having said that, I think it's completely just not right. I think that they're better positioned than any team, and as you mentioned, they could just clear the decks.
Also, the
Spurs,
go after LeBron.
The Spurs did win the title. The Spurs won the title with Kawhi Leonard as the Finals MVP, and they were pretty close to another one without Ray Allen.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this is a team that like dismantled the Heat. I mean, they didn't have. I mean, Kawhi was just emerging then. So they if any team can win without the multiple superstars, it's the Spurs.
And you look at the rosters over their, I don't know, 15 years. Most of them are bad. Fabricio Oberto was played a huge role in at least
all the guys who have
those
left the Spurs, and you're just like, that dude used to play in like the Western Conference Finals.
Bryn
Thiago
Forbes,
Splitter,
yeah,
like
Bryn Forbes is
Bertans.
taking like
Oh my gosh. That's why I kind of wonder, like, the first thought for me when I heard about these news yesterday, I was like, okay, so how much do the Warriors factor into this? Like, is Kawhi saying like, oh, like we have no shot or whatever? But like, you're the Spurs, right? You know, so it's like we talked about how good they are, even though the rosters have looked bad. So the thing I wonder is like, it kind of feels like more of a cultural thing than a basketball thing, because you talked about LaMarcus Aldridge and his problem was like, oh, I don't fit on the court, or like it's not working well with Pop, and Pop adjusted. But the fact that this is with Kawhi, like the number 1 star on their team, this feels more like something else. Like,
I don't think
saying?
it could be possibly basketball related, because they essentially went away from some of the principles that won them the title a few years ago to play a much more ISO heavy Kawhi on the wing, clear out and get into right spaces style of offense. Not particularly aesthetically pleasing one, honestly. I mean, like, they move the ball better than almost any team, but I think that it was still pretty ISO heavy when it was with Kawhi, especially last season. The one last thing I wanted to consider with this whole story is, isn't it kind of an interesting sort of sub-narrative of the season about the different disagreements big-time players have been having, or could be big-time players have been having with medical departments? Because obviously the Spurs feel like Kawhi's healthy enough to play. Somebody thought Isaiah Thomas was ready to play in Cleveland, whether it was Isaiah Thomas who was like, I need to put numbers up to get a contract, or whether it was Cleveland saying we need to figure out whether or not we can run a pick and roll with you and LeBron before we get to the playoffs. And to some extent, the Fultz story, you know, where you've got multiple differing messages coming out of the front office, coaching staff, and players camp.
Yeah, and even the DeMarcus Cousins injury, apparently, like Tom Haberstroh had the story right after the fact saying that a lot of the minutes he was playing at such a high pace potentially contributed to that. And I'd heard that like the coaching staff in particular bristled about that. And then all of a sudden, a few days later, they came out and said, hey, by the way, we're actually going to play Anthony Davis only 36 minutes going forward.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of this going on. I think it just, we have so much information and it's butting up against like the way people have always done things. It's very similar to the way the analytics movement, right on the eve of Sloan, the Sloan conference this weekend, they are always talking about how we have so much accessible information now. It's about messaging it properly to,
and it's about actually figuring out what is useful and what
that
isn't.
too. We have so much.
That's why you guys aren't on the level where it's like John Wall got that knee surgery now, so he can be fresh for the playoffs. No, but you know what? Yeah. We are going to be talking about this more again if the T-Wolves get blasted in the first round of the playoffs. Yeah. If they look gassed and some team runs all over the Timberwolves in the first round, I mean, the Thunder can't do that because the Thunder are playing their guys like almost as much as Tibbs plays his guys. But this idea, where it's like save guys with the most important part of the season of the playoffs, we're going to see that really put to the test when we get to the playoffs. Guys, we're back. The playoffs are approaching. They can't get here fast enough. 25 games left, more or less.
More or less.
That was what Pop said. We only got 25 games to figure this thing out. And if Adam Silver has his way, although I don't know if I think Adam Silver's really good at floating things and sort of being like, I'm thinking about it.
He's an idea guy.
He's an ideas guy.
100%.
So he is thinking about something that a lot of people have been suggesting over the years, including our boss, Bill Simmons, is that we should do straight seeding for the playoffs. That conference seeding 1 through 8 in each conference is outmoded. That we're at a point where we could properly schedule things where we would go 1 through 16 and we would no longer have to have crappy 8-7 seeds in the Eastern Conference. I think this was greeted with a lot of excitement from fans, a lot of curiosity, and immediately the first person to throw some cold water on it was LeBron James. We kind of, as offline, we're talking a little bit about, well, why would LeBron not want straight seeding? And it was like, well,
I mean, he's made the finals for the last 12 years off this system.
Because, and it's like everywhere this is an interesting conversation to have in relationship to LeBron's free agency coming up. Paolo, what do you think of straight seeding yourself, and what did you think of LeBron's response?
So I think in theory it makes sense, right? It's more fun. It gets the best teams in there. I wonder. So at the press conference on Saturday, Adam Silver said it's not about tradition; it's about travel, which I think is kind of a cop-out in a way, because like there are ways to reconfigure things, I think, to make it an easier thing. I think the interesting part is just like the fact that LeBron, I don't want to extrapolate LeBron's comments to be like, okay, so
he's staying,
right? Right, yeah. I think he's just like, it was like very off the cuff, and he's like, that sounds awful, like traveling, to the West Coast for a 7-game series or whatever. Like, I just think he's kind of like,
this would be really cool until there was a Portland-Miami series and guys were in the air for 14 hours every 48 hours.
Well, I do think it's interesting what you're talking about with tradition there, just because I think we think about LeBron as a disruptor in terms of just free agency and everything else.
Sure.
But I think he is a traditionalist. You hear him talk all the time, and you hear people that know him say like he's just a student of the game. He really respects the history of it all. And it seemed like that's what was like his answer was steeped in. And I think on the other side of things, you have Adam Silver, who's very much a progressive. And even though he hasn't been able to get through a lot of things, the things that he has are very just liberal and just like a new, fresh approach on things. They do a lot of things in the G League to test out and pilot that are just completely radical in that sense. And so I think when you're at the level of the commissioner and LeBron James, two people who are just masters of working a press conference, like you almost have to look at this at like political candidates. And I think they're very much aware that they're on opposing sides of this thing. And I think they are kind of messaging not only to the public at large, but to each other that like they're almost trying to sway opinion and to rally the troops. I think it's a really interesting just theater being played out in front of us, and to be honest, I'm very much pro Silver in this regard.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just don't know how feasible. Like, what's the time frame? Was there a time frame that was?
There's a bunch of things that are when this would get enacted. I think it's something
tomorrow.
that they're going to actively look at over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
One thing that Silver said was that I think he acknowledged that travel is not quite there. I think his quote was,
you can't fight time zones.
Yeah, it's basically maybe ultimately you have to add even more days to the season to spread it out a little bit more to deal with the travel. Maybe air travel will get better. So I have a message from Adam Silver, which is that air travel is getting worse. If anybody has flown the direct flight from LAX to Philadelphia, I mean, it's like,
would we mind adding days to the season? Like he says, like you need to add days to like even it out, I guess.
But can they accommodate that and less games during the regular season?
That would be ideal.
Also, 5-game series in the first round. You just scale it back to there. But we already have like New Orleans in the Central Time Zone playing West Coast games constantly. So it's already an imperfect system. And to suggest like LeBron kind of is that everything's just fine and good, I think it's really kind of just overlooking some of the flaws baked into what we already have.
So it's like would you tinker with it or would you rehaul it, revamp it, completely and remodel it? I don't know. I think that I have like an affection for the conferences. I think you'd have to do a lot of funky stuff like the best of 5, but the better seed gets multiple home games, like more home games, like maybe 4 out of the 5 have to be played at that team's place. I still think that's I think that there's a problem with it is that we get to the first round of the season, the first round of the playoffs, and a lot of the times half the series are kind of duds.
Yep.
And I think that they are looking for a way in which they have this window. The NBA is sort of rising in its Q rating across the country. It's becoming a more and more popular sport every month, and they want to take advantage of that, and they want to create a postseason that's as exciting as the NFL's, because right now they don't have that. Right now it's like the finals are good. There's really good conference finals games, but you have to be kind of a basketball junkie to really get into Milwaukee versus Detroit round
in a
1.
7-game
In a 7-game series that could be 3-1, and then the lesser team steals game 6 or whatever, and you just kind of like, okay, like let's keep going.
That's what all of my non-NBA fans will say.
Yeah.
Or friends will say. They'll just be like, yeah, it's just like
You're non-NBA fans.
Non-NBA fans who come to me for my music takes.
I'm a multifaceted guy. But yeah, they'll always complain about just like it's so predictable. And especially when compared to college basketball, it's the complete opposite of that. There's
right.
no
You just have to
excitement.
accept the idea that the Blazers and the Pacers could be playing for the finals.
And they're not going to win the finals.
We already make fun of that game because we're like, oh, the NBA TV game. Like, what's going to be the NBA TV like series this year or whatever? So, I mean, I think it would make it more fun. I think that I do wonder though, in terms of tradition, if there is kind of like an allure that we give even to the Eastern Conference Final and the Western Conference Final. You know, we're still going to have those games, but you know, they won't have the kind of will they have the same kind of tradition or aura about
I think
them?
that we at this table probably do, because we think about things like Chris Paul's legacy.
Right.
And I don't think that the average sports fan's relationship to basketball is probably a lot more similar to the three of us and our relationship. You're a bigger college football fan, but I don't really care until it's like the last, maybe like a big SEC game or the last few weeks of the season, and then it's the Final Four, and then I become the world's foremost Clemson expert for 2 days. But it's like that's where a lot of people are just like, oh, is it time to care about the Western Conference Finals? We're like, oh, what would happen if Houston doesn't get past the second round? You know, like that's so big, and most people don't give a shit.
And for the most part, we've been saying this all year. Like the Western Conference Finals this year is probably going to be the finals.
Yes, and that was Adam Silver's main point. Is that that I too often, I mean, the Thunder and the Warriors from 2 years ago was probably my favorite postseason series that I've ever seen, and that the fact that was not the finals, and ironically led to the sort of reshaping of the league. It's a really it's a huge inflection point for the league. One of the other things that's been kicked around, and Zach tweeted about this today, and it's been talked about for a while, is this idea of a play-in tournament between, I think, the 10th through 7th seeds or something like that in each conference, which I think is really cool. Anything to kind of like generate interest. I do wonder whether or not you're basically competing to get your head kicked in.
Yeah, it doesn't solve the main issue of the other proposal, which is just to make the first round more interesting. If we're basically just saying you're having a play-in in order to have a less interesting first round still. It's not like solving anything.
Yeah. We've talked about these sort of other ways to spice up the league over the years. But I always like the idea of something that's closer to the FA Cup in soccer, which is like a concurrent tournament that runs alongside the season and has some sort of reward at the end of it. Now, the FA Cup is in England, and it's a soccer trophy in England, which is the oldest trophy, and it sort of has this history behind it. And then every once in a while, there's just like this huge upset, and everybody goes nuts for it. I think that would be hard to generate that right off the bat with the NBA, but lottery spot? Something like, is there cap relief? Is there something that you could incentivize where it would be like, what if the Warriors could win 2 trophies in 1 year and get a lottery spot or something? Or just saying. I mean, like that would be. Would you watch a single elimination tournament that maybe in the beginning of the rounds was maybe Patrick McCaw was playing more minutes, but then in the semis and quarters was the regular lineups, and it was basically March Madness running alongside the NBA regular season?
I mean, would I watch it? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I watched the baseball one and out
Yeah.
thing that they have going now, and I don't watch any other baseball games.
Right.
So I think that would be the carrot to the casual
Boy,
fan.
the NCAA would not be cool with that.
No.
If there was like a pro March Madness going. All right. Well, we're talking so much about the playoffs. Let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen before we get there. So I wanted to just get some second half predictions from you guys. Let's start with you, Paolo.
All right. I'm going to say the Thunder. This is not per se a bold prediction, but I'm in on the Thunder. I'm back in on the three-headed monster, even though
Andre
Melo's kind
Thunder.
of like, no, I want Paul George to have a rampant second half of the season, and I think they're going to get the 3 seed, especially now with the Spurs being kind of like being dicey without Kawhi. I think that's my main prediction, which is not crazy, but I think Thunder are going to we're going to go into the playoffs thinking that they have an outside shot at beating the Rockets and then depending on the matchups, beating the Warriors. Even though we all know it's not going to happen, but I think they have their top end is really impressive and it's really fun to watch.
Right. Already have a higher point differential than the San Antonio Spurs.
There you go.
Just in terms of my own prediction, I'm very pro Utah Jazz these days, mostly in order to support my own. Well, that and to support my own prediction from January,
That's right.
and to just continue to tell you guys about how amazing and wonderful I am, as Danny hears every day in our office. No, but all of the math suggests that they're a way better team than their record is right now. Obviously, they were without Rudy Gobert. They've been without Ricky Rubio at times. They're counting a lot on Donovan Mitchell, and that is going to scare me. And obviously that they're still trying to play 2 bigs is scaring me. But I think they have a softer schedule over the last couple of games, and they've really found something here. I love Royce O'Neal. I think what they have just works. I wouldn't be surprised, young Paolo, if they finish with home court advantage in the first round.
Wow. You think they're going to get up to the 4 seed?
It's just such
it's wide open.
A traffic jam there between 3 and 10 right now.
Damn. And if Dante Exum comes back?
Oh, come on.
I forgot. Is he supposed to come back this season?
He might.
Ooh, God, that'd be great.
What if Dante was holding himself out?
So the Jazz fans are envisioning a lineup with Donovan Mitchell and Exum in the backcourt, and they're calling it DMX.
Oh my God,
that's
really
good. I mean,
can they just play Rough Riders Anthem whenever they take the court? What's up with Rubio? Is he?
He just had like a little hip
DMX.
Injury. Yeah, I know. What's weird is that he took off during that streak. He was like scoring like 30 points a game. Like Danny and I talked about it at one point where like he was actually getting to the rim and finishing, and actually those like rocket launcher 3-pointers were going in. And I don't know how sustainable that is.
It's not.
He's really but he's a really confusing player.
Let's ride the wave. He'll be back soon, I believe. I think it was just a hip, like kind of just ding.
Danny, what's your second half of the season prediction?
You know, I was gonna say your predictions were a little tepid until you kind of finished it off.
Do you think Paolo's the Thunder will be good?
Well, no, they not necessarily tepid, but there wasn't a real concrete prediction there.
There was no hill that they were dying on.
The Thunder are going to win the West.
Sure. Okay. Why not? I'm in. Let's go.
Let's circulate that on social.
My prediction is that the Sixers will be the 4 seed in the East.
Love it.
Wow.
They've had the toughest schedule in the season.
Check your Venmo.
And I think Embiid has been just phenomenal since
All-Star MVP.
Yeah,
the real All-Star MVP.
The real MVP. If he was in the game, Team Steph would have won. They've been an incredible defense since 2018, and everything seems to be clicking. You know, fingers crossed there aren't any major injuries, but
everything seems to be clicking.
Yeah, they have Bellinelli.
Yeah,
in the
Markelle Fultz is like not even in the back of my mind.
No.
Yeah,
he hasn't played.
Just wait until you see the next video of him on Twitter.
Danny,
is that your prediction?
Awesome prediction.
Thank you.
My prediction is pretty boring, but it's that the Warriors are about to rip stuff up right now. They play the Kings. They play the Suns 3 times. They play the Kings twice, and they play the Hawks twice. They have the easiest record of playoff teams in the Western Conference. If my reading of a weird chart was right, but either way. Those guys, we already know that those guys have burner accounts. Like they read the internet. They've seen our "Are we sure the Warriors are ready for this?" takes. They've seen us second guessing them. They've seen people, ripping them for letting Draymond coach against the Suns.
KD only reads tech blogs. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's true. Yeah, he's just on. He's on Gizmodo every day. No, I think that they have heard our second guessing, and now they're in. For the first time in several years, they've gone into the All-Star break facing the prospect of having to play on another team's home court to the extent that Houston has a home court advantage in the Western Conference Finals. I think that they're gonna rip off. They're gonna be playing their best basketball when they get into the postseason, and I think that this is not going to be as close as we thought it might be in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm very much on record now that I think the Rockets are going to win the title and finish first in the West. They get Trevor Ariza back, I believe, soon, which I think
we
will
have
help.
multiple bets about this.
Okay, yeah, we could talk. We could settle up later. But I think it is funny that I look at the standings right now, and the Rockets, even with the Warriors struggling in air quotes, are
Rockets
only
have won
up
10 in a row and are up a half a game on the Warriors. That everybody is like, I guess that's it for the Warriors.
Not great.
Yeah. So I think that they'll be fine. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to get off your chest about the second half of the season? Any hopes, any dreams?
I just want everyone to have a good time, to play well.
Let's see the Nuggets actually make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I'm ready
that.
for this.
Yeah.
I'm really ready.
Millsap back.
Yeah.
I very much believe in what they have, but I can't go out on a limb or die on a hill for them simply because like there's just so many young guys. Like I love Jamal Murray. I believe I said he's going to be better than Brandon Ingram the other day, which is a take that I guess I'll have to stand for now.
You like go backwards into these takes. You like say them and then you have to like go back and double down on them just to you
well,
know.
he spends so much time being like, this was my take. Remember that? That he also feels like he needs to be like, I have to say that I did have this other take.
Right. You need to stick to your convictions. But they're counting on a lot of younger guys. Gary Harris, another guy that we like. It's just like they're on the younger side. Jokic, they're not really proven. So I think Millsap will be a big key for them. He needs to come back.
I hope his wrist is like, I hope they put in some, what's that, Black Panther?
Oh,
Vibranium.
Yeah.
That's all they need.
Yeah.
They also may need some alpha dogs in the locker room. Listen to that Richard Jefferson pod with Bill where they were just like, we're just a bunch of chill bros who love to meditate.
It's going to be Devin Harris. You know,
Yeah.
It's going to be Devin Harris.
Devin Harris.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Jonathan Sharks has mentioned that Devin Harris is going to make a huge difference in this locker room.
All right, John.
I trust
I love
Sharks.
John, but let's walk back a little bit.
On that note, on Devin Harris is going to save the Nuggets. Let's wrap up group chat for this week. We'll be back next week. Make sure you check out the Ringer NBA show. We're pumping out tons of pods every week. Heat check, Verno and Kev, sources say, draft class, group chat. Thanks for listening.